youth, tear upon the core of blasphemy. Follow your prophet, and on evil make a victory. Let our righteousness be a role model to our children, making new generations of believers decently upbringing, with parents as an example. As gems we shape them, fearing only Allah, devoting our lives for Him.
Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum, peace. Welcome to Closing the Gap. I'm your host, Omar Dunlap. We have with us in the studio Shaikh Yusuf Estes. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullah. How are you doing today, Shaykh?
Everything, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, very good.
It's nice to be with you today.
Jazakallah khair. What about the gap between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots? Is that something we should discuss?
Well, certainly, Omar, that's a very important topic and has been since time immemorial. Those who have and those who don't. And there have been many societies and ideologies that have been presented over the centuries in an effort to try to deal with this topic, in an effort to somehow even things out or to make it better for those who don't have, and at the same time those who have want to protect their interests. So we find different structures of governments and societies and cultures, and all of them, even today, dealing with this subject of the poor and the wealthy, and there's this gap in between.
Very good. How do you see the current situation between the rich and the poor?
Well, certainly today it's different, and yet in the same, there's similarities to what we've always seen. One of the things that we'll say that is different is that there is a lot more available knowledge out there about what's going on. It's not just selected areas where a few people have the knowledge of what's happening. More and more people today are realizing about economy, what it's about, and what are the principles behind it. But at the same time, we still suffer from a large number of people being without and a large number of people who are very, very wealthy.
So how do you think that the wealthy people are viewing this situation today?
Not being one of those, I would have to speculate from what I've read or heard and talked with some of those who are very wealthy. What they tell us that they're concerned, a lot of them are concerned over holding on to what they have. But this is not a new situation by any stretch of imagination. When we look to the Gulf countries, or when we look to the European countries, when we look to the societies of the West and the East, we find that a lot of the wealthy people are very concerned over the present economic situation, especially related to wars and security interests, interest that people have in the internet and what's the transactions that are taking place there, financial transactions. So this is a big concern of the wealthy people, looking at what's going on and what they need to do to sort of support what they have, protect themselves against the losses.
Very good. What about the people that aren't as fortunate in terms of financial situation? How are they viewing the current situation?
Well, of course, having visited a number of countries, I've been in some of the poorest. If you go, for instance, to India, if you go to portions of what they call the third world countries, I was in Mandera, Kenya, and as recently as just a few months ago, we found places where people are living without even the basic necessities,
like
which
what?
we would, water. One of the most basic of all necessities is water. Mandera, Kenya, there were places we visited that had absolutely no water. The way they got their water was that a child would take a donkey and walk for approximately half of a day to a river, and then fill up these jugs and containers with water that is really, I wouldn't want to wash my automobile. I wouldn't wash my car with the type of water he had to come back with. Not just because of the amoeboids and the bacteria that's in it, but some of the larger things that you find in it, not just dirt, but creepy crawlies, insects, and, So, and then they would come back and spend the other half of the day to return. And then when they got all done, there was just barely enough there really to take care of the basic things, such as making wudu to pray, just to wash yourself up with basic hands, face, feet, things like this. And in some cases, it wouldn't be enough for that. They'd have to make tayammum. You know, when a person wants to pray, they need to be clean, and if you don't have water, you can use dust. And imagine he's gone through all of this, and even the water is hardly potable. You could, you and I wouldn't be able to drink it. We'd get sick.
Right.
And this is what they're having to cook with. This is what they're having to drink from, and sometimes not even enough left over for their animals to take any of it.
What did you? Would you say that there's a lack of understanding the reality between the rich and the less fortunate, for example, among the rich? Do you think that there's a divide? Do you think they don't see that type of reality?
I think there's always been that problem. That this is a gap that many don't want to be aware of. They don't really want to know. They just say the poor and leave it at that. There are those who have a lot, and they will consider themselves poor. A person has a lot, but it's still in his mind, he's looking up to the next person and saying, you know what, this guy is loaded, and here I am, I've only got a few million, and this guy's got $1 billion, you know.
Right.
And on the other hand, when you look to those that are very, very impoverished, as I was describing the situation in Bandera, Kenya, it's by no stretch of the imagination the only place. If you visited other countries, in not just in Africa, but in the Indian continent, you'd find places where people similarly are suffering from lack of some of the basics. Just to have, as we mentioned, running water, there's also a lack of basic clothing, basic shelter. People that are living in cardboard boxes, making sticks and grass to make a shelter for themselves. Today, in today's world, not something you're seeing in National Geographics from 40 years ago, but right now, this minute. And you could visit the Oriental countries and see this type of thing. But then you might be surprised that even in New York City, we have people who are living under bridges who don't have any more than some of these people in the other countries we're talking about.
Speaking about, I mean, obviously, both you and I are from an American background. What effect did it have on you to see that sort of thing? Because it's not something you generally see just walking down the street in America. So then when you visit these countries, I mean, obviously that has to have, you know, some sort of eye-opening takes place.
Omar, there's no doubt that a person coming from our background see these things firsthand. It has a tremendous effect on you. Now, I know that there are organizations that are visiting in places like Argentina, in Chile, in South America, also in Central America, and they're seeing this kind of thing firsthand. And it's very, you know, mind-blowing. It's a shattering thing to your insides when you realize that these are human beings just like I am. And yet look at the suffering that they're enduring. How could it be that, you know, we think of ourselves as not having so much, but then when we look to these people, we realize that, oh my God, I didn't even know people were suffering like that in the world.
It's a very deep thought, I think, something that we all have to think about. What does Islam have to offer in this crisis, in this difficulty?
Well, as always, we look to Islam for the solution. But before we look to a solution, I think it's important to really identify the actual problem. Because very often we hear people tell us what the problem is, but it might be superficial, or their explanation may not be detailed enough to really understand. Because if you don't really know the problem, you might try for what's called a quick fix. Human beings are known to do this. We're very prone to do this over the centuries, that we want to find something real fast, solve the problem, push a button, and it's all finished, and go on about our day. And especially with something like that we're talking about, with these huge gaps in our program, this is what we're talking about, these really huge gaps that we find being discussed around the world. And in all cases, we've got somebody who wants to offer some kind of quick fix. But Islam is not telling us to look for quick fixes. It's actually telling us to look closely at what the situation is, identify a problem, but then look to what the Creator of the universe has offered for us. Now, Almighty God Allah, the one and only Creator. He is the one who's behind all that happens. And not only is He causing conditions to exist, but at the same time, He's providing us with solutions to these problems, provided that we properly identify what the problem really is, and